Good evening from Israel, and welcome to another Israel Insider with me, Ashley Perry. As per usual, I will give opening remarks for about 15 minutes and then take questions for the second 15 minutes or so. If you do have any questions, please put them in the Q&A in the public chat, and I will endeavor to get them to them after my remarks. So here in Israel, obviously, there is, as always, a lot going on, but I want to focus really on two major events that took place with major political ramifications, which perhaps might not have got as much play around the world as some of the other events involving Lebanon, Gaza, even Iran, etc. One of the major events was the not completely unexpected request from Prime Minister Netanyahu, official request, to President Herzog, to basically what has been styled as a pardon, a request to pardon. We know that President Trump has spoken to President Herzog. He mentioned it on his visit and during his speech in the Knesset. And there was an official letter written by the US president to Israel's president, again, asking for a pardon for Netanyahu. But as President Herzog said at the time, he can't do anything until the person themselves or someone representing them will ask for the official pardon. Well, it came this week. It was well over 100 pages long, written mostly by Netanyahu's lawyer. There was one letter written by Netanyahu himself, tried to lay out the reasons why his request should be accepted. But there's a very strange aspect to a letter that ostensibly asks for pardon because it does not mention a pardon. There is no admission of guilt or anything close to that. It's basically a request to stop the trial. That's what it was. Netanyahu lays out his case, saying that there's really no case. It was politically motivated. It's harmed his ability to run Israel, to run the Knesset, to run the government, especially during a time of war, even though we're now ostensibly after the war. Let's not forget this is a Netanyahu who at the beginning said that I have the ability to do both things, to run a country and be in a court case. And he stressed that point very vociferously many, many times. Now he seems to be doing 180 on it and basically saying he is unable to do it. What is most interesting, there's a few things. Let's first of all talk about the precedent. First of all, usually, as we know all around the world, a pardon is given when someone has been found guilty. In fact, the law in Israel dealing with this issue on the ability of a president to give a pardon basically says a pardon can be given for an offender. In other words, someone who has already been found guilty. And we are probably many years away even from a ruling. Obviously, Prime Minister Netanyahu, as all defendants, is considered innocent until proven guilty. But nothing has really happened to change that. So it's very bizarre and to a certain extent even goes against the law to even consider a pardon when there is no actual offender in this case as of yet. There is a precedent here, and this is something that people have been pointing out over the last few days. Around 40 years ago, there was what became a very famous case called the Bus 300. There was a bus that was attacked by terrorists, and some Israelis were murdered. Then the terrorists were attacked, and the terrorist attack was basically stopped, and the terrorists were killed during the operation. What came out a little bit later was a picture of the terrorists actually alive when the operation had ended. I think there were two terrorists who were then subsequently killed, and the whole debate was, were they killed during the operation, after the operation? Images show that that happened afterwards. It was a very, it was the kind of case that really, split the country in half between those who say, that they clearly murdered the terrorists afterwards, to those who say, it's the fog of war, it was very difficult, these are murderers, etc., etc., and they should be given clemency. In the end, that's what happened. Ironically, it's actually the current President Herzog's father, Chaim Herzog, who gave that pardon. But, and this is the big but that a lot of people are pointing to, it was only after the officers involved admitted guilt and there was resignation, including the head of the Shin Bet, very high-level resignation. That was the deal that was made. I will pardon, the president will give his pardon as long as there's admission of guilt, and there'll be resignations. In other words, there'll be reparations for what they did, etc., etc. Here, we do not see any note of that. We don't see any admission of guilt. We don't see anything offered in exchange for the pardon. A couple of years ago, before October 7th, in fact, in the previous Attorney General, there were negotiations for a plea bargain with Avichai Mandelblit, the previous Attorney General, actually appointed by Netanyahu himself, who later famously fell out with him. And there was all sorts of things. Netanyahu would resign, but the debate is whether he would then be up to run in the next elections. But there would be a admission of guilt, there would be a resignation, etc., etc. That, in the end, did not take place. But today, this week's letter basically makes clear that Netanyahu does not expect to give anything for this so-called pardon. And again, I use the word pardon, even though that's not what was actually laid out in the case. It's a very interesting situation because it puts President Herzog in a very difficult situation. Half the nation will be against whatever decision he makes. If he decides to pardon Netanyahu, the anti-Bibi camp will be up in arms and it will basically make Herzog their enemy number one. If he decides not to, the pro-Bibi camp will basically claim that they're against him and this is, his obligation, and claim again that the system is against the right wing, is against Netanyahu, etc., etc. At the moment, what he's done is he's trying to fall back on bureaucracy as much as possible. He's saying that he has to seek the advice of the relevant people in the Justice Ministry. There is actually an infrastructure specifically for looking into this and seeing what the rights and the wrongs of it are. And then he says it will come back to his office and he'll get advice from his legal advisors. He has also asked, this is President Herzog, for the general public to chime in and write to him and say what they think should be done. But the fact that Herzog is even entertaining this is already considered very problematic from a legal point of view by many who say that there was no request for a pardon. You can't pardon someone who has not yet been found guilty. What exactly are you pardoning? What are you getting from this? Another interesting aspect to the letter is that Netanyahu himself hints in the final paragraph, it's a relatively brief letter that Netanyahu himself writes, where he basically says that, or hints at, or perhaps more than hints at, that if this is done, it will heal the nation, or steps will be taken towards healing the nation. And there are many, in fact, analysts who have read into this, that basically what he's hinting at is he will, if he's given this pardon, he will take steps to heal the nation. And one of the things that people are saying is he will then dump the judicial reform. If we remember, before October 7th, that was the big issue dividing the nation. That was what brought the people in the hundreds and thousands to Kaplan Street in Tel Aviv, were demonstrating every single Saturday night. That was the issue up until October 7th. It's still very much on the agenda of the right. It has been on the agenda, Netanyahu, for at least 10 years. Interestingly, almost exactly the same time that the legal case against Netanyahu happened. Those who are against Netanyahu say this is someone who before the legal system came after him personally, was a big champion of the current judicial system and said it shouldn't be touched. The judicial system should be, independent, etc., etc. So, interestingly enough, those who have backed him, who have said that this is the most important issue on the political calendar, those like Justice Minister Levin, Justice and Constitutional and Legal Committee Chair Simcha Rotman, this has been the issue of the right already now for at least a few years. And if Netanyahu is offering to halt these reforms, and also in media as well, which has also become a bit of a hot potato, then that would really be an interesting political development, because that is really what the right wing has rested. It's become their cause over the last few years, obviously not including everything that happened since October 7th. So it's a very interesting case. But what it does do, and this is again from Netanyahu's detractors, is say that it's classic Bibi. It's a deflect and distract tactic. Bibi wins no matter what. If he gets the pardon, then that's great. That's something he's desperately seeking for, and he's tried many, many different ways to get rid of the court case, and this would get rid of it once and for all. If he doesn't get it, he will then be able to show once again that the judicial system is against him, is against the right wing, is against everything he stands for, again going into elections as the victim, even though he is the incumbent. And most importantly, from a political point of view, distracting from October 7th, because, you know, many people think that the elections will be about October 7th. The failures, what happened afterwards, who can protect us from the next October 7th. These are not necessarily going to be positive for Netanyahu, but to rail against the judicial system has worked in the past, and it could well work in the future. Not necessarily related, but very much related, another issue that came up was finally we saw a draft law, a bill come up in the Foreign Affairs and Defense Committee on the so-called enlistment law, or as its detractors would call it, the non-enlistment law. According to, in fact, I even saw it myself, according to many members of Knesset, it bore absolutely no resemblance to anything that was discussed before. And as we know, if something's going to come up in committee, it has to be discussed. Either it has to start as a new law, or if it's going to be a continuation from the previous one, it has to take into consideration discussions and remarks from previous laws. And this was so heavily red-lined as to basically make the previous law or bill and this bill absolutely, completely two different laws. But the fact is, the chair of the committee, Boaz Bismuth, at the direction clearly of Prime Minister Netanyahu, brought the bill for debate in his committee. It obviously caused a lot of remonstration, especially from serving soldiers, from those bereaved families, etc., who feel that this is a law according to its detractors. And if you look at the law itself, it will have almost no effect on bringing too many more ultra-Orthodox. The case the government is making it, yes, within 3 years it will bring 12,000, but the law extends the definition of who is Haredi. It says we only need to reach certain benchmarks. It basically gives a complete, allowance not to serve after a certain age. I mean, it really has so many holes in it that, according to, sort of even neutral observers, if you can find them, this, if anything, will even lower the current rate of ultra-Orthodox enlistment. So it's become extremely unpopular. And I get the question that many, many are asking is, why is Netanyahu doing this? We've talked about the fact that he needs the ultra-Orthodox back in his government as soon as possible. He needs to move forward. He needs to pass the budget. He needs to give himself more time, because the further time he has from October 7th is better for him electorally, and that's showing in the polls. He's slightly improving his status. It will be interesting to see what happens if this bill does move forward. But what we did see as a result of this, we do see a Netanyahu in panic, and we rarely see that. Netanyahu, love him or hate him, he's a very composed, thoughtful, and strategic politician. He usually understands the lay of the land, plans everything out very carefully, and is usually one step ahead of his competitors. Well, this week we saw quite the opposite. Yesterday, we heard, as we hear quite regularly in Israel, that Netanyahu is going to give a statement. We knew it was going to be on this issue. He was going to lay out the case as he saw it for the promotion of this law. It was going to be broadcast on all of the main news channels, and at prime time. And basically, shortly afterwards, we heard that Bennett and former Prime Minister Bennett and current opposition leader Lapid would also give a statement about it following Netanyahu's remarks. Suddenly, at the last minute, literally with minutes to go, the media all received notice that this statement would no longer be given. An extremely bizarre excuse was given that there were scheduling differences, which is quite remarkable because it was a pre-recorded message and the media already had the pre-recorded message. So it was a very weak response to say it was because of scheduling issues, and suddenly they claimed a meeting with Transportation Minister Miri Regev, which was 100% not true because, as I said, it was a pre-recorded message. So a lot were trying to analyze this. Why did he do it at the last minute? Is it because he wanted to get the last word? And when he knew Bennett and Lapid were going to get the last word, he wanted to basically wait and then do it after they responded. In the end, they did respond. And then we were told Netanyahu will probably give his response the next day, in other words, tonight. But still, as of now, Netanyahu has not released his pre-recorded remarks or newly recorded remarks. But probably the reason why he decided to can it at the last minute is actually pressure from the ultra-Orthodox. The ultra-Orthodox understand that this is an unpopular law outside of their community. They publicly are very suspicious of the bill. They are not overly favorable. They say, let's wait and see. Yes, there are elements which we could support, etc., etc. Behind the scenes, it's the greatest thing they've ever seen. It's weaker than anything that they could have imagined. So they're very happy about it. And they did not understand, and they were not happy when they heard, through the media, that Netanyahu was going to give prepared remarks on the law, claiming, why are you stirring a hornet's nest? We know that this law is unpopular. Why are you trying to bring it back to the foreground of the public attention at a time where, it's not favorable? We're hearing even tonight, IDF soldiers being injured, some of them very seriously. We see some even being killed in the last while. And the fact that now this law can get put up is certainly not a positive mood. So the ultra-Orthodox actually said to Netanyahu to can it. And that's probably what happened behind the scenes. So we're really starting to see a little bit of panic from Netanyahu. Perhaps it's connected to the legal proceedings against him. Perhaps it's relating to the fact that time is running out. We're now in the last month of the year and the budget is not moving forward. The ultra-Orthodox have not returned to the government, and now is the race to get them back. And he's prepared to do a lot of things which are very unpopular, even within his own party. There are a significant number and a growing number of rebels within the Likud who say that they will not pass this law. Now one of the most relevant figures is Bezalel Smotrich of the Religious Zionist Party, who has enough votes on his own to stymie the law. And at the moment, he said he's not going to pass this law as is. Whether there'll be any cosmetic changes, and then he'll be able to go back and say, look, I was able to change it. That remains to be seen, and that could be what's happening. But still, it's a law that some say is dead on arrival. It will not pass through. So why is Netanyahu expending a lot of political credit on it? So we'll have to keep an eye on that, because these are two very important events from a political point of view in Israel. And as I said, they will have ramifications for a lot of what else is going on. Some of the, we saw an attack tonight by terrorists, those terrorists who are hiding in Rafah, who come out every now and again and try and shoot at IDF soldiers. They were killed, but we've heard of at least 4 injured. We did, alongside this, hear that one of the 2 bodies of the last remaining deceased hostages, was released today. Well, we haven't got confirmation yet, but we believe it is the remains of the Thai hostage. If that proves to be true, then we're down to 1 last remaining hostage, and we'll have to keep an eye on that. Interestingly, on the northern border, things seem to be moving quite quickly. There was a historic meeting, the first direct talks between Lebanese and Israeli officials in decades, perhaps even longer, at a place called Nakura, which is a UNIFIL base. The reading or the understanding of the meeting was relayed very differently by the Lebanese and by the Israelis. Prime Minister Netanyahu talks about it could be the basis for cooperation and even hinting at normalization. The Lebanese said, absolutely not, nothing to do with it. We're not normalizing. We're not declaring peace with Israel. This is just a way to discuss de-escalation on the northern border. But it's clear that Netanyahu is being pushed into these talks by President Trump and his administration, who are also keeping a very keen eye, not just on what's going on in Gaza. Again, Israel will respond to this attack on its soldiers tonight. We already are starting to see part of that response, but it will be limited. And it will be limited because of President Trump. He does not want the peace that he's building in Gaza, in Lebanon and Syria to be disrupted. And that is what's laying into a lot of the strategy on these three fronts. So with that, I'm happy to go to the public chat. Let's see some of the questions. So we'll start with one from Carrie Hillebrand. Is Israeli assessment that the Iranian regime will survive the intensifying water crisis? How is it expected to impact Israel? Well, we already see that once again, as has usually happened whenever there's an economic, social, environmental disaster in Iran, they try and distract the public by saber rattling. We saw today with the declaration of a whole new drone army that's that they want to use against what they call the Zionist enemy. Nothing we haven't seen before, but it's mostly for internal consumption to show, yes, things are bad at the moment, but we have a plan. And yes, we are still strong and we will defend you against the Zionist enemy, etc. So, this saber rattling can go a little bit too far if it's just for, for visual purposes, for internal public consumption. That's one thing. But if they try and miscalculate and try and do something which will threaten Israel, then obviously that can have a lot of problem. That can be a major problem. And again, that could be an attempt by the Iranian regime to distract and deflect attention from the terrible water crisis in Iran. So Israel certainly keeping an eye on this, and remains to be seen exactly how this will affect. I don't know if the Iranian regime will, it will have too much effect. We're talking about a very authoritarian regime that clamped down even more so after the 12-day war with Israel. So I'm not sure if this is the tipping point. I'm not an expert on Iranian internal affairs. I haven't heard too many who said that this could be the tipping point, but obviously the situation gets worse and worse, and perhaps there is a point where the people snap. But again, I'm not an expert in that, so I can't really talk to that too much. Jose Montero asks, how can you pardon anybody before court decide if you're guilty or innocent? Exactly what I brought up at the beginning. It is a very problematic situation, and even more so that he didn't even ask for a pardon. He just, Netanyahu, obviously we're talking about, he just asked for an end to the legal proceedings, and he didn't express any sort of regret, any sort of, acceptance of some of the charges against him. So it wasn't a pardon, and he's not really asking for a pardon at this point. It's at the moment, it's a bit of a show. Obviously, Netanyahu would be very, very happy if President Herzog would give him what he wants, in other words, to cancel the legal proceedings. And as we've seen, there is a precedent for a president to step in even before the end of a court case, even before guilt was actually assumed, to give a pardon. So there is a possibility of that. But again, we see quite a lot of differences between that particular episode and this. So we'll have to wait and see how that plays itself out. Jack Wasserman asks, who is most likely to replace Netanyahu if he decides not to run in the next election? Well, my assumption is he will run in the next election. I just don't see any situation where he doesn't. At the moment, things can happen in the next few months. Maybe he believes that this is a race that he can't win, so he will step aside and then hope whoever takes his place doesn't succeed and then comes back in as a shining knight, as he did once before, and then win the elections. But I think that's extremely, extremely unlikely. He almost certainly, and he said so himself, he said he's not just looking at these elections, he's actually looking at the elections even after that. He's getting on in age, but he's still pretty fit. He's still obviously very with it. And he has ambitions to rule the country for a very long time. So I don't see a situation where Netanyahu steps aside. And the point that you're making, who would step in, is also an interesting one, because there is no obvious successor. I can give my viewpoint. I think Nir Barkat is probably the best place to follow Netanyahu if tomorrow there was a need to. But again, there are many people in the Likud who believe that they're successor, and they don't like each other, and it's unlikely that one person will rally round. So more than likely, if Netanyahu decided not to run tomorrow, the Likud would be in a bit of a disarray, because Netanyahu himself has never named a successor. He even struggles to name someone when he's incapacitated through an operation, or he's abroad, or anything like that. So there is no clear successor. I would give my view, as I said, probably at this point, Nir Barkat is the most likely to take over if tomorrow there was a reason to, but it's not a sure thing. There are many people who see themselves in that role. So, but again, the bottom line is it's probably a moot point at this moment in time, because Netanyahu sees himself as leading Israel for many years to come. A question from Eric Zelkov: why can't Israel destroy all the tunnels in Gaza? Well, again, I'm not a military expert, but from what I understand, first of all, it's taken Israel 2 years, and it's only been able to destroy a few tens of percent of all the tunnels. We're talking about a massive system, I think a few times larger than the London Underground, which is massive. It's a very large system. For a long time, it didn't want to do anything because it was worried about hostages. Now that's not an issue. But let's not forget, Israel is not in charge of a large part of the territory today, especially areas where the tunnel systems are extremely, where large parts of them are. Israel is destroying tunnels, but it takes a long time, and it could perhaps, even if there were no other impediments, it could take years to do. And obviously at the moment, Israel is not acting over the yellow line, which was created according to the peace plan. So it's a very, very difficult situation. Israel is trying to destroy as much as possible, especially in the area that it controls beyond the yellow line to the eastern part of the yellow line. But it's not that simple. From what I understand, these are extremely lengthy, extremely deep and well-built system, and it's not as simple as just putting a few explosives here or there. But again, I'm not an expert, and that question is probably better put to someone with the military or whatever infrastructure understanding of these things. And with that, I think we'll leave it, because we're coming to 1/2 the hour. And I'd like to thank you again for joining us, and for those who put their questions in. And I look forward to seeing you next week. Thank you very much, and have a good evening.